Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining today's NASEO Manufactured Housing Task Force webinar. My name is Jasmine Shia, a Senior Program Manager with the Buildings team at NASEO. We welcome you all back in the new year with two exciting presentations on two new resources. And first, we'll be hearing from Kevin McGrath, consultant at VEIC, or the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, and Patsy Duggar, Director of Business Development at AESC. Kevin and Patsy headed up the creation of a statewide manufactured home characterization study developed for California through the CalNext program, which is California's statewide initiative for decarbonization research. And this report presents a snapshot of the condition and character of the manufactured homes and households across California as a baseline for discussing the barriers and opportunities for energy efficiency improvements and electrification on those homes. And then after that, we'll be hearing from Pat Stanton, the Executive Director for E for the Future. Pat will be proposing a scalable incentive program designed to increase the uptake of the Zero Energy Ready Homes standard and potentially also on-site solar for those manufactured homes. This proposal envisions leveraging the US EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and also envisions a state energy office role in the consumer outreach and marketing of these potential programs. So with that, our discussion today will ideally present state and territory energy offices here in attendance with new ideas around conducting characterization and electrification readiness analyses on their stock of manufactured homes, as well as think through any potential applications with the greenhouse gas emissions or greenhouse gas reduction fund opportunity. Note that the slides and a recording of today's meeting will be shared with everybody who's registered after. And this is also a Zoom meeting, so while everyone is able to come off mute to participate during the two Q&A sessions that will be happening after every presentation, we do ask that you remain on mute while our presenters, moderators, and your fellow attendees are speaking. And last but not least, we're really grateful to the U.S. Department of Energy Building Technologies Office for their support of today's webinar. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and share my screen for Kevin and Patsy's slide and turn it over to Kevin and Patsy to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Jasmine, and thanks everybody for having us here today. Patsy and I are really excited to present this work to you that we did through the CalNext program. So why don't we just jump right in to the next slide. I'll give a brief overview of what we plan to cover. So we'll start with some introductions to our organizations for those who aren't familiar, as well as to the CalNext program itself. We'll then discuss the California mobile and manufactured housing market characterization that our organizations recently completed. In that, we'll cover the study objectives, the goals, the methodology, and some key learnings that we took away. We'll also talk about the challenges that we encountered and some takeaways for you all to think about if you're considering doing something similar for your states. And then we'll close out with some next steps that both the VEIC and AESC are working on in the manufactured housing space. Next slide, please. So I'll start with an overview of VEIC and the work that we do. I'm a consultant with VEIC, which is a nonprofit organization founded in 1988. We're headquartered in Vermont with offices also in the District of Columbia, Wisconsin, California, and Hawaii, and lots of remote staff working across the country. I'm one of those remote workers. I'm based in New Jersey. And our goal is to provide high impact energy solutions that help decarbonize buildings, transportation, and utility grids, with an emphasis on ensuring benefits of these solutions accrue to the communities that need them most. We do this through a combination of direct program implementation and a national consulting practice. For example, we implement Efficiency Vermont up in Vermont and the District of Columbia Sustainable Energy Utility. We provide program support for Focus on Energy in Wisconsin. We're part of the implementation team for CalNext, which is what we'll be talking about today. And we support numerous state, federal, nonprofit, and private industry clients through our consulting work. I'll pass it over to Patsy now to discuss AESC and the CalNext program. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Kevin. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. Happy to be here and present the study. I'm Patsy Duggar. I am Director of Business Development at AESC, but I've also been involved with a lot of emerging tech work that AESC has done over the years with utilities. Helped stand up the CalNext program. AESC is a national clean energy engineering consulting and programs implementation firm. We're celebrating 30 years this year of serving utilities, public and IOU, governments, and private sector clients with a wide variety of energy and climate goals and projects and programs. We have offices throughout California, in Portland, Seattle, and in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we support clients in other states as well. We have 4 practice areas: engineering services, programs implementation, technology research and integration, and software. Our software team has developed integrated platforms that support everything from measure modeling and program implementation to project M&V at the measured approach, like in the kind of the homes program measured approach type M&V. And then we also have a bunch of custom software solutions. And with emerging tech, we've been doing research into emerging tech, both field studies as well as market characterization type work for about 15 years. And we're one of the core team members of the CalNext program. Next slide, which I will talk to you a little bit more about. So the project we're describing today is funded under CalNext. CalNext is California's statewide emerging tech program. It's funded by the state's 3 electric IOUs under the auspices of the CPUC. The program objective is to identify and evaluate emerging electric energy efficiency and decarb technologies and practices that in order to basically validate them, to introduce them into the utility portfolios and programs. So we do that through both field studies and market characterizations and special integrated projects. The program's delivered by a third-party team. It's led by Energy Solutions, and it's got 5 firms in it. And over the roughly 5-6 year program period, we're slated to deliver about 170 research projects. So we've got a rapid volume of projects that we're managing at any given time. It's pretty exciting. We develop technology roadmaps and priority maps. Those guide the way that we rank ideas that come into the program. And we also look at ideas in terms of the lens of whether technologies and solutions can meet the specific needs of disadvantaged communities and hard to reach customers. That's one of the priorities of our program, because oftentimes there has not been a focus on that, and it's solutions that are unique to these markets are really important and needed. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, who is going to talk about the study that we did that is very specific to hard to reach and disadvantaged communities. So, Kevin?
Great. Can we go to the next slide? So, as Patsy mentioned, there's this kind of unique policy driver in California that makes the mobile and manufactured housing market of particular interest to the utilities. One, the CPUC in California has defined as a customer segment all mobile and manufactured homes to be a hard to reach customer class. And we also know that a lot of residents in this housing stock tend to be lower income. And so there's kind of these two pieces working together to place emphasis on this market segment. So with that kind of background in mind, what we were hoping to do through this project was to gain a better understanding of the existing housing stock for mobile and manufactured housing in California, and to really kind of dig in on these questions that we see here on the screen. So like thinking about the homes themselves, what are the physical characteristics of the homes? How do they perform from an energy perspective? Where are they located throughout the states? And are there important regional differences that we should be aware of as programs consider how best to serve them? And importantly, what are the resident demographics, and how does that impact the way that we think about the opportunities and barriers for implementing electrification, energy efficiency, decarbonization programming in this space? We wanted to include assessments of the policy, regulatory, and programmatic landscape impacting the market sector. So we'll talk a bit about that. And fundamentally, what we were hoping to do through this project was to identify the barriers and opportunities to electrification and energy efficiency retrofits, with an additional goal of trying to understand, when does it make sense to consider whole home replacement as a potentially better investment for the homeowner, going forward? Is there a set of the housing market for mobile manufactured homes that is best addressed through replacement as opposed to a retrofit? Next slide, please. So I'll talk briefly here about the methodology that we used to cover those objectives and goals. There were three main components. First was a market assessment that included review of existing studies, custom analysis of public data sources like the American Community Survey or ACS, American Housing Survey, Residential Energy Consumption Survey or RECS, as well as some California-specific information from the California statewide Residential Appliance Saturation Survey. It's a tongue twister, but CA-RAS is its common acronym, as well as some other tools like the ResStock and LEAD tools from the Department of Energy. The market assessment also included review of HUD and California-specific codes and regulations that impact both the homes themselves as well as mobile home parks where many of them are located. And then a final piece of that market assessment was reviewing the existing retrofit energy efficiency and decarb programs offered by both investor-owned utilities throughout the state, as well as statewide programs that are offered by different agencies in California. Going beyond the market assessment, we had a stakeholder engagement component where we engaged with key stakeholders through outreach and in-depth interviews to confirm what we learned in the market assessment, and then also fill gaps where public data sources didn't have readily available information to understand this market. And then a final piece that we included in our project was to do some energy modeling using the typical characteristics of existing mobile and manufactured homes in the state identified in that first component, the market assessment, and to model that along with the characteristics of new construction built to different standards like the Zero Energy Ready Home standard or the Energy Star for mobile manufactured housing standard, with a goal of assessing the potential impacts of retrofits and whole home replacement scenarios on both energy use and bills, as well as greenhouse gas impacts and peak load impacts for the electric grid. Next slide, please. So what did we learn about the mobile and manufactured housing market in California through the market assessment? Well, first, there's about 500,000 mobile or manufactured homes in the state, of which about 440,000 are primary residences. That's about 3% of the housing market in California. So while it's a large number in California, it's a bit smaller share of the housing market than in some other states. So something that as other states consider how best to serve their market, something that's important to know. We also learned that most of the units in the state are owned, but are located in private mobile home parks on leased land with master meters. So it presents a unique setup where you've got home ownership of the units, leased land with master meters, and a big split incentive issue between the homeowner and the park owner where the units are located. We also learned that more than half of this housing stock in California was built before the initial HUD code was put in place, and that many of the units are in disrepair and energy inefficient. For example, in the hot, dry, and mixed dry climate zones, you can see here, the energy use intensity of manufactured housing is about 30% higher than it is for single-family detached homes. And in the cold climate zone in the state, it's about 60% higher. We also learned that most of this housing stock is located in that hot, dry climate zone, the southern half of the state in particular, and that most of the housing, about half, is located in mobile home parks where there's 100 or more lots. So pretty big mobile home parks, high concentrations of mobile and manufactured housing units together. Is kind of the lay of the land in California. Then when it comes to fuel usage in the home, it varies a bit by the end use, as you can see here on the slide, but natural gas is the predominant fuel used for space heating, for water heating and cooking, with different shares of other fuel types based on whether you're looking at the heating fuel or water heating and so on. And then finally, when we look at resident demographics, what we found was between 40 and 70% of residents meet at least one, have income that would qualify them for at least one of the state's income qualified energy programs, ranging from bill assistance to decarbonization programs. But interestingly, only about a quarter, just a little bit over a quarter of the housing stock is located in census tracts that the state has classified as disadvantaged communities. So, if you're just kind of focused on the disadvantaged community aspect of California's equity-based programming, you would miss a lot of this housing stock. It's located in other areas, kind of off on its own, but has a lot of residents who otherwise are in need of these types of programs to help them better afford their energy bills and have better performing homes. So I'll pass it back now to Patsy, who's going to talk a bit about the stakeholder engagement piece of our work. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Kevin. AESC and our partner led outreach to a variety of stakeholders who touch the mobile and manufactured home market in various ways. This included basically scheduling and conducting 30 to 60-minute interviews with key stakeholders. And they fell into a couple of primary buckets. There were program implementers that included programs that are dedicated to the mobile manufactured market for energy efficiency, funded through CPUC energy efficiency programs. There are also low income programs that are able to serve this market. There was an implementer who had conducted an electrification pilot in the San Joaquin Valley that included a variety of single-family homes, including mobile manufacturers. So they had some interesting data. And we also included interviews of a variety of program managers that managed these kinds of programs, as well as a meter conversion program we'll be talking about. We interviewed state agencies, including the California Department of Housing and Community Development, the California Public Utilities Commission, and staff at the California Energy Commission. And then we were able to have a pretty interesting interview with a manufacturer of mobile homes, manufactured homes, the California Manufactured Housing Institute, and a pretty progressive mobile manufactured home park owner who is pretty interested in developing more low carbon and electrified type parks. So that was an overview of who we spoke with. Next slide, please. Okay. And just a little bit more about the program landscape. There are the IOU programs that have funded work in this space, have traditionally been direct install type programs that install, light fixtures, low flow shower heads, faucet aerators, pipe wrap, that kind of thing. Some insulation where possible, as well as some comprehensive measures. Let's see, there is a program that's been underway for some time under the CPUC to convert master metered mobile home infrastructure or park infrastructure to individually metered homes. The Housing and Community Development Program addresses mobile home and park remediation. That's called the Manufactured Housing Opportunity and Revitalization Program. And then, as I mentioned, low-income programs that are general, not really specific to the market, but intend to provide comprehensive energy efficiency and decarb measures. So you can see there's quite a lot of programs that touch this market. They're all different. They're not, some try to coordinate, but it's, there are silos and the program data is all separately housed, and pretty difficult to aggregate for analytics purposes. So that was, an interesting challenge. Next slide. Some of the key stakeholder learnings, and there were really tons of common threads in different conversations that we had, were that, it's very challenging to retrofit a lot of the older home stock. There's poor insulation in the pre-HUD. It's difficult to get insulation as a retrofit. There is a lot of homes that are difficult to access. Ductwork, there's, the wiring is old, the closet sizes are too small for, most available, electrification, heat pump water heaters, for example. Lots are often cluttered with stuff. Lots are sometimes too small to accommodate trenching for, electrical remediation. And so there's a lot of physical barriers involved with addressing these homes that kind of limit what's possible to do. And so you're nibbling around the edges of efficiency opportunity instead of really getting into the best opportunities. So that's a challenge. Master metering is a big issue that causes split incentives. Because the homeowners might do a retrofit, but they're not going to get the direct benefit of that because they're going to be charged the same thing through their agreement with the park. The park owners don't really have an incentive because they're not paying the utilities. The parks are generally limited in terms of the amperage with less than 100 amp or 100 amp electrical service. And panels limiting, electrification opportunities. And there is a lot of interest in this conversion program, but it's really hasn't hit a huge portion of the market yet. There's a long wait list. And we discovered that they were in doing the retrofits, they're still keeping to the 100 amp in that program, which hopefully is something that can change. But that does not lend itself to a lot of electrification at this time, or it causes some challenges. There's some fragmentation in programs that is really confusing to customers. That they're being outreached by different people doing different solutions. There has been an effort, of course, to coordinate between some of the low income and the energy efficiency programs. So they've been good at trying to do that, but there's still some confusion in the market. Often utility programs have had baselines that don't really reflect the reality of the market that they're dealing with. And so oftentimes the measures under a deemed approach don't really capture the true value of the projects being done. And as cost effectiveness has become increasingly challenging for programs in California, some really good measures have dropped off the list. And so that was an issue that some of the program implementers raised. And And another issue that's been raised is that sometimes park owners are real gatekeepers. So it may be more of a hassle for them to participate in these things or open their doors. They've kind of kept a lot of parks out of participation entirely. And then with kind of an exciting finding was in talking to one of the manufacturing companies. They had taken advantage of a DOE grant that was allowing them to offer some of their really advanced zero energy type homes, super efficient homes that are the kind of leading edge, that next level of efficiency at parity with their standard build. And so they are predicting that in the next 2 years, it's going to be more than 75%, I think, of what they sell. But of course, there are infrastructure limitations to what can happen in those homes. So that's the counterbalance to that opportunity. But in terms of efficiency, there's some really exciting stuff happening on the new construction side. Hope I didn't go too long on that. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Patsy. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about the energy modeling that we did as part of this study. So you can see on the left side of this slide are the scenario descriptions, and on the right side are some very high-level findings for a particular piece of the market. What we did was model 2 retrofit scenarios, one where there's just electrification that occurred, one where there was electrification plus weatherization, and we applied those scenarios to HUD 1976 vintage homes and HUD 1994 vintage homes. And then we also modeled 4 new construction scenarios, one that's based on the proposed 2022 HUD code update, and then one based on the Energy Star manufactured housing requirements, and 2 different versions of the zero energy ready homes, one just based on the minimum specs for zero energy ready homes, and one that has high efficiency in some optional areas. The modeling was done for different climate zones and compared to baseline conditions, meeting kind of a pre-HUD home condition, a 1976 HUD home condition, and a 94 HUD home condition with either gas heat or electric heat. So you can see some of the assumptions that we had to build into the modeling. It assumes typical weather, and importantly and critically, that all equipment operates as designed, that there isn't kind of user interactions. We know that that's not what actually occurs in the market. So that's just one important caveat to keep in mind, when you think about, the modeling results. On the right, we've got a few bullet points here that show what the range of impacts were for single section manufactured homes in the hot, dry climate zone where most are located in California. We look at site energy impacts, utility bill impacts, and both summer and winter peak load impacts. And when we look just at site energy, we see decreases kind of across the board for this piece of the market segment. But when we look at utility bill impacts, it's a bit more variable. There's decreases, but then there's also potentially some increases to be aware of. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just kind of talk through that utility bill impact example a little bit more. So this provides, again, a more detailed view of the potential impacts on resident utility bills for that same group we were just talking about, single section manufactured homes in the hot, dry climate in California. And hopefully this will give you a better sense of the range of what you would get out of this type of analysis, and also what some of it's showing for the state of California. I've highlighted the row midway down in yellow, and I want to just focus there for a minute. But what you have on the left-hand side are the baseline conditions, and across the top of the table are the modeled scenarios, so either the retrofit or the new construction replacement modeling scenario. And the percentages shown are the change in potential change in utility bills in the upgrade scenario, retrofit or replacement, compared to the baseline. So if we look at that yellow highlighted row and say we just look at the electrification plus weatherization retrofit scenario compared to a 1976 HUD vintage gas heated home, there's a 33% bill decrease that we modeled. But if we were to replace that 1976 HUD vintage gas heated home with, say, a new construction based on the proposed update to the HUD code in 2020, the 2022 HUD code update, we see a 17% bill increase for that scenario. And if we go all the way to the right of that row, where we're looking at a zero energy ready home built to all of the high performance optional standards, we kind of get back to that bill savings opportunity that you see in the retrofit scenarios. The main point that I want to make in this table is that, it's important as programs think about how they want to address this market segment with retrofit and potentially new construction opportunities, to consider the baseline conditions of the homes that they're looking to treat, and to, as they electrify this housing stock, to do so while also doing high performance envelope work. That's the best way to ensure that affordability challenges aren't made worse, and that in fact, this work is helping residents with more affordable bills after the work occurs. Next slide, please. So just a couple final things from the study. One of the outputs of the project was a process diagram to help a future program implementer in California, if they were to try to take on this retrofit versus whole home replacement opportunity, decide which pieces of the market segment to prioritize. There's two pieces of it. The one that's shown here on this slide is the utility side considerations. It's addressing, the metering setup of the mobile home park if located in one, transformer capacity, and then service to individual lots. If we go to the next slide, it shows some customer side considerations to keep in mind, if looking to do electrification retrofits and whole home replacement, considerations for vintage, whether there's structural, electrical repair needs in the home, what's the existing envelope efficiency, and then what are any electrical panel capacity limitations that need to be considered. More details on these are in the report, but I think it's a nice thing to highlight. While it's California specific, it is something that, if you engage in a market characterization like this, you can kind of come to this process diagram for your own state as a result. We'll go to the next slide. All right. So some challenges and takeaways that we'd like to leave you all with based on what we learned throughout our project. One of the big challenges that we found in the project, particularly on the energy modeling side, was, it's great to have this assessment of potential impacts, but we're hoping to be able to refine it a little bit more using actual measured program savings from one of the programs in California that treats manufactured and mobile homes. And that proved to be a challenge for us. So it's something that, takes a lot of coordinating with a lot of different agencies involved. In California, I imagine it's similar in other states. And so kind of having those ducks lined up ahead of time would make that process easier. Similarly, getting good cost data is really hard, and being able to kind of refine the analysis that we were able to do with good concrete costs on the retrofit side, plus what it costs for a home that is being, a new home being built to these various different above code standards, is something that as a program gets developed, there's going to be a need to dig in on that front. There's also just the kind of a general caveat that, we use a lot of publicly available data sources in our project. And for the state of California, which is huge, that turned out to be fine. There was enough sample size in those different sources. but for other states that may not be the case, and it's just kind of a caveat that regional analysis might be needed in other places. But the better, larger samples you can get in different sources, the better off your analysis will be. And then kind of finally, stakeholder engagement is key, as Patsy mentioned. But some stakeholders in our projects we found to be really easy to work with, and others to be very difficult to engage. So tap into trusted networks to engage, in particular, mobile home park owners and residents, to kind of break down those barriers that have formed over years of different interactions with programs. And I know Jasmine mentioned that you'll get a copy of these slides afterwards. So we have a link to our report here in this slide. I'll also drop it in the chat after we're done, so you all can access the report that way. And we'll go to our last slide real quick. I know we want to leave some time for Q&A. Just a few next steps for both the VEIC and AESC. We're working on some ongoing research now about how offsite construction, including manufactured housing, can be used to develop affordable home ownership opportunities for low and moderate income households. We're also scoping some similar market characterization work in Vermont that will build off what we learned in California. And then I think a really interesting way to kind of continue this research is through some field demonstrations. Patsy mentioned some of this a little bit, but looking at some of the learnings from this broad market characterization and then trying to apply some field demonstration projects through CalNext, for example, using intelligent power management technologies like smart electric panels or smart circuit breakers and relays to address some of the electrical service infrastructure challenges observed in mobile home parks. Will be a really interesting thing that hopefully we can move forward. And with that, our contact information is here, and that's the end of what we have to say. So we're happy to open it up for some questions from the audience.
Thanks so much, Kevin and Patsy. We do have kind of a scheduled Q&A session here, but I'll kind of switch things up a little and just encourage us to first go to Pat Stanton's presentation, and then we'll do Q&A kind of jointly together at the end, if that's okay with everybody, just in the interest of time and seeing that Pat might have some stuff queued up. So, all right, I'll turn it over first to Pat. And in the meantime, I guess if anybody has burning questions on top of mind that they want to jot down right now in the chat while this content from Kevin and Patsy is fresh, please feel free to do that. But we'll move on to Pat, so the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. That was a very interesting presentation and such a interesting challenge. I'm going to talk about a much kind of smaller piece of the market, which is really new housing. And are there opportunities, federal programs such as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, to think creatively and maybe move the needle on new manufactured housing installations, and whether that's a good idea in states. Next slide. So everyone here knows that their energy, the zero energy ready home standards DOE has for single family, multifamily, and manufactured housing. And the really significant tax incentives that are available for these housing opportunities. Manufactured housing is particularly interesting because it is available. The rebates are available to manufacturers, and the oversight is at that level, which may, depending on the state, provide a benefit of not having to put together an oversight and program. And that's one of the questions I'm interested in discussing with folks on the call. Next slide. And I'm sure everyone here, or good number of us have seen the announcements from Clayton, the largest manufacturer of the HUD certified, HUD standard manufactured housing, and their commitment to really transition to 100% manufacturing of the zero energy ready home. This is a really fast pivot in market, and I think there is a real opportunity to think about, can state policy, state education, and maybe incentives, maybe just education, could help have a larger percentage of the purchases in your state be of this to meet this certification. Generally, a really good state may have 30 or 40% of housing in 2022 manufactured housing purchases were Energy Star. And in a lot of states, it's 10%. So depending on the state, the situation in your state, the opportunity of increasing the percentage of the higher quality energy efficient homes and climate friendly homes may be a real opportunity. Next slide, please. So I've been working for the last year or 2 years actually, with practitioners in the manufactured housing world. So people who lend money very specifically to manufactured housing buyers, the developers, who there are a number of folks who are looking to develop subdivisions of that use manufactured housing to reduce the overall cost for what they're calling sort of starter home subdivisions, not for the most vulnerable population, but for the folks who are really getting squeezed out of the market because there's just not a lot of new housing in that starter home category, at least, especially single families. Resident-owned communities and the potential for the resident-owned communities to invest in solar and other kinds of things. Manufactured housing dealers. Manufactured housing is not sold in the same way that real estate is sold, and the manufactured housing dealers are very important participants in the supply chain. And so how, what would help them come on board, get on board for selling the advantages of the zero housing, and of course the manufacturers. So this group, which I'm calling practitioners, have put together some models that they think from their perspective of the existing value chain for manufactured housings would potentially really help to move the needle. Next slide. Certainly before doing a program, you need to do assessment. I feel like this slide is redundant after all the great presentation we just had about thinking about the opportunities and how important it is to have an idea. And I do think that the role of affordable housing supply, and is that a major issue in your state? Is this a place to really partner with your housing agencies to get both benefits of affordability, lower operating costs going forward, and environmental and energy benefits together? And that depends on the circumstances in an individual state. Next slide. So these are the kind of 4 program straw proposals we've put together. They only have the perspective from the participants in the value chain. So I didn't want to get into a lot of detail here. To make the best use of our time, I wanted to just kind of indicate the things that they thought about, and certainly increasing the percent of the homes sold that are purchased not only by low income or qualified for various services households, but for all households in your state. Are there programs that would, through education, and there's a sense that if the state were to do an outreach and marketing effort, kind of give a seal of approval to the fact that these homes will save energy, that it could drive participation in the market. One of the most interesting, and this would potentially lean on the Solar for All funding and the GGRF, is to facilitate solar financing and installation at the time of purchase. And if you think about solar installations on rooftops, it becomes a custom thing. If you're going on to existing buildings, it's hard. You don't, the wiring to the box is going to be different in each home, and you might have to upgrade the box and so on and so forth. In these zero energy ready homes, that's all standardized. So one of the concepts is, to have the lender have a vendor that they're working with, a solar vendor, and they can negotiate sort of a bulk price and have it be able to have the solar all wrapped up in the funding and the financing, so that the payments for the solar can be stretched out over 20 years. And for low income households that would qualify for Solar for All, you could utilize that approach of a standard vendor or pre-approved vendors, and also utilize Solar for All funding. And finally, it was so interesting for me to learn, talking to the participants in practitioners, excuse me, that there's some amount of this that happens in the market already. Thinking about, is there a financial incentive? The state of Maine, I just spoke to their program, their replacement program manager about 2 weeks ago, and they have a program in place. They put $30,000 on the table, but they're only getting about 30 households a year. Is there a way to increase that by partnering with the dealers and the lending institutions to improve that level of participation? I have a 2-page summary of our straw proposals, which I'm happy to share with folks. My primary goal here today is to let you know that folks in the industry are really interested in learning about how they can work with the states, work with state energy offices, with state housing agencies, to help bring the message and help increase the proportion of the homes sold that are in the SEER category. Next slide. So I'd really be interested to see if any of the states that are on the call are interested, or would be interested in a follow-up conversation with some of the practitioners, or are particularly interested in low income versus the entire market. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Pat. And like promised, we'll be now transitioning into a Q&A session that will be kind of audience-led based on reactions to both presentations that you've heard today. So Kevin and Patsy's presentation on the new CalNext report and what Pat just recently proposed. And I also see that Kevin just dropped a link in the chat to their report in case anybody's interested in reading more closely. But I guess to kick things off, one common thread that might tie both the CalNext presentation and Pat, your presentation together is the fact that affordability remains like a core tenet to all of this. And so I guess from both of your perspectives, when we're thinking about, conducting an electrification readiness assessment for both existing and new homes for those that might be appropriate to replace, and for Pat, your considerations on like introducing this new incentive model to just drive uptake of highly efficient new homes. Are there kind of enough details at this point in time around like utility bill impacts of these recommendations? Is there like a heavy role for utilities to make sure like the rate structures are proper? I guess I'll give Kevin and Patsy the floor to answer that first and then pass it over to you, Pat.
Sure. Yeah, I can give some thoughts on this. So, in our modeling, what we did was just apply statewide utility rates, given that it was broad-based and is kind of just scratching at the surface. But it's a great question because we know that utility rates are variable depending upon where you are, even within the mobile home park segment of the market. The way that the billing occurs differs. If it's a master metered park, it might be on a commercial rate where the volumetric rate is lower. And if you are electrifying and at the same time you're going to individual meters and now somebody is on a residential rate, does it go up? Does it go down? Do they qualify for an income qualified rate? Is there the potential for an electrification residential rate in the future? These are all critically important questions, I think. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done and a lot more attention to detail as programs get designed with that specific aspect in mind. Patsy, is there anything you would like to add on that?
Yeah, just building on that, when your logic model looked at, individual site information, it gets to also what their baseline equipment is. And if the importance of making sure that if you're converting someone to electric from gas, that you're not inadvertently driving up their costs, especially in an event where it's difficult to insulate, and so the envelope's not really ready to support that. And so it is really, really important to keep the baseline equipment and cost structures in mind. And I know that in California there's discussion of a lot of different changes to future rate structures that may support electrification, but others on the commercial side that may move towards real-time rates where certain hours of the day are going to be exceptionally higher than others. And so it's really going to be devils in the detail as those things roll out and apply to different segments.
I would add that certainly as we get into rural areas, and I've been doing some work in Maine, which is very rural, and where you're not going to have many of these new homes situated where there's natural gas. We're talking propane. So not only does it matter switching from fossil fuel to electricity and what those impacts are, but also which fossil fuel you're using. And I would say the other thing is to make sure you have thought through those impacts in the particular, geographic area, the particular utility area where you're doing this work so that you can think through those rate design issues. And is there, rate design is a place where public policy can be very, very impactful. It's a tough slog, but it may be an important part of the solution.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I'd also kind of look at going back to Pat, your presentation slides, like one piece that I think maybe folks on the line might also want clarification on. Here, I think in the fourth bullet that you lay out, you were proposing like a replacement on pre-1990 occupied manufactured homes, and then crosswalking that kind of with the decision model that the CalNext project put out. I think there was like the threshold year of 1976, given that was when the first HUD standard came out. Could you like explain a little bit more like your thinking around these criteria? I guess like
right,
both
it's sort of when, you know,
CalNext
which of the HUD standards, the first one or the early 1990s. Also, when you start talking about any home that's 30 years old, you're talking about a home that probably needs help in the energy area. So it's just in the conversations I've had with practitioners, they've been inclined to go with that standard rather than going only with the 76 standard, because their experience is that most of the pre-1990 are in need of help.
And to add a little context from our study, you know, what we saw was half of the California market is pre-HUD code, so before 1976. And just from a reality check standpoint, there are going to be limited dollars for a program that replaces homes. And so we set our cutoff at 1976 HUD is still in the realm of keeping in a retrofit, just because of that reality that if there's limited funds, the lowest hanging fruit are those pre-HUD homes to replace. It's not to say that all 1976 HUD code homes will be suitable for retrofit. And the same is true of a 1994 HUD code home that hasn't been well kept over the years. But as a grouping and specific to the California market, you know, we felt that the research that we found supported keeping the 76 HUD code homes within the retrofit track until something throws them off that retrofit track in the logic model.
Great. And seeing that we are at time, we really appreciate all of your really interesting presentations. As I mentioned before, the slides will be going out to all of our registrants and attendees today with Kevin, Patsy, and Pat's contact information included. So encourage any additional lingering questions to be sent to them via those emails, and really appreciate those who are able to listen in and attend today. Any last thoughts from any of our presenters, kind of things that you'd want to impart on our audience?
I would say just keep up the good work, and you know, if you do have questions that come up afterwards, feel free to reach out. You know, Patsy and I are happy to answer questions about our study and engage in further discussion.
And we'll be happy to send out the 2-pager and see if there's any interest.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. And with that, have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.